Good morning, April 12th, 2020, Sunday morning, Easter Sunday. All churches and pastors and teachers probably a lot are teaching on the typical Easter Sunday morning lessons and sermons, but God gave me something different today. As I was studying early in the week, He gave me an old hymn song to kind of lead me off on, and I had to go to digging, but Wednesday night, God gave me the first set of scriptures I'm going to use, and then Thursday morning He gave me the second one. And He gave me stuff to go with them, so with His help I'm going to try to give you what He gave me. It'll be found Psalm 61, verses 1 through 3. It said, "Hear my cry, O God, attend unto my prayer. From the end of the earth will I cry unto Thee. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For Thou hast been a shelter for me and a strong tower from the enemy." Here lately, since the coronavirus, the pandemic has been going, I, like many, have not been able to go to church, haven't been able to hear the sermons. My daughter comes and videos my lessons, but I don't even get to hear the sermons of that. So I've been having to rely on the Word and prayer. But there are still times when the old enemy comes in and our heart gets overwhelmed. And I had been at that point, and when I hit this scripture, the Lord just He'd give me a touch. And then it says, "Lead me to the rock that is higher than I." It leads us to God, to Christ. He's the one that's higher than I. He is our rock. He is our strength. And then it says, "For Thou hast been a shelter for me and a strong tower from the enemy." He has sheltered us. He has took care of us. He's kept His precious strength and His shelter around us and kept us from harm. But He's also been a strong tower, which means He's been a place that I could go to Wednesday night. The enemy couldn't get to me, and He gave me a chance to be recharged and rejuvenated in Him. So when our heart's overwhelmed, we have Him to turn to, really only Him to turn to. Well, I woke up Thursday morning early, and God gave me this second scripture. I was thinking about David, who wrote all these Psalms and how beautiful they are, thinking, just what may have brought on the Psalms that he was writing. And God took me to 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 6. First off, you have to kind of look back. David was with his 600 men, and they were running from Saul. David was kind of fearing for his life, and they'd ran over into the land of Philistines, into the land of Gath, where King Achish was. And he had kind of been taken in by King Achish, and he had asked the king, for a place for him and his men to stay, and the king gave them Ziklag. So they took them and their families, and they moved in there, and come a time when Philistines was going to go to battle against Israel, and King Achish was going to go with them, the king of Gath, and he asked David and his men to go. Well, when they got there, the Philistines seen David and them and had a fit. The princess of the Philistines asked the king to tell him to go home because they didn't trust him. And the king told him that as long as he had known him, David had shown no evil. But the princess still insisted, so he asked David and his men to go home. And they finally did, and as they got to Ziklag, the Amalekites had been there, and they had destroyed and burnt down the city. They'd taken all the families and all the spoils and all, and it went away. They hadn't killed any of them, but they took everything. So when David and his men got there, the word tells us in verse 4 that they sat down and they wept till there was no more strength left in them. And then we get to verse 6, and it says, "And David was greatly distressed, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters." But there's a very special ending to this verse. It says, "But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God." Sometimes when we find ourselves overwhelmed and we find ourselves in trouble, we find ourselves battling like we have been here, and we go to that rock, sometimes we just have to sit down get our word and get to praying and encourage ourselves in the Lord. And when we are overwhelmed like that, the Lord is our rock. He will be there. He will lift us up. He will carry us through, and He will get us to better times. And I believe if we just hang on, God's got everything in control. We just got to believe and trust in that rock that He's going to take us to. The song that He gave me, I'm not going to sing it, but I'm going to tell you the words. The old song is Tell It to Jesus. The first verse says, Are you weary? Are you heavy-hearted? Tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus. Are you grieving over joys departed? Tell it to Jesus alone. Verse 2, I'm going to just say the words there, but it all says, Do tears flow down your cheeks unbidden? Have you sins that to men's eyes are hidden? Tell it to Jesus alone. Do you fear the gathering clouds of sorrow? Are you anxious what shall be tomorrow? Tell it to Jesus alone. Are you troubled at the thought of dying? For Christ's coming kingdom are you sighing? Tell it to Jesus alone. Then the chorus just says, Tell it to Jesus, tell it to Jesus. He is a friend that's well known. You've no other such a friend or brother. Tell it to Jesus alone. All we have to do is when we become overwhelmed, when it tells us, lead us to the rock, we're taking it to Jesus. We take it to Jesus and leave it in His able hands. God will take care of us. He will keep us, and He will be our shelter and our strong tower. We may not be able to handle it on our own, and we're not able to, but there's nothing too big, nothing too great that God can't handle. May you all have a blessed Easter Sunday. Thank you.